A Raisin in the Sun is a fascinating play. Just a little side note: there's a that is worth sort of mentioning because it helps you to understand its importance. In the 1970s, there was a television sitcom called Good Times, and it was one of the series of black television sitcoms that aired on television in the U.S. In the 1970s. And Good Times was interesting because when you look at Good Times, and I'm sure it's available on some streaming networks now, and you start to look at the plot of Good Times, you begin to realize that Good Times is actually modeled on a raisin in the sun. In other words, it's set in a ghetto, so to speak, in the middle of Chicago, and then all the characters, are essentially the same characters as Good Times. The difference is that Big Daddy, the father who is in Raisin in the Sun, is dead by the time we get to the play, in the play itself. But he lives as John Amos is the actor who plays him in the television sitcom, and eventually in the sitcom, of course he would eventually pass away, but it's a comedy. But of course, the people who created Good Times understood the model of looking at the microcosm of an African American family and the issues that an African American family face in a place like Chicago, in urban America. So let's talk about the play. Of course, the play is particularly engaging because, of course, the play establishes a series of crises and a series of decisions that have to be made. And Hansberry is brilliant about sort of framing the entire movement of the play around certain major questions, right? And she creates a problem. The problem that she creates is that here's a family that has an inheritance, This is a family that has a father dying and he's left some money. There's some inheritance money that is there. A mother, who is the patriarch of the family, has some ideas about what should happen to that money. Her son, who is a chauffeur, he's a driver, and is ambitious and wants to do something. Walter wants to do something with his life, also has his view about that money. And then his sister, who is in at university and is planning to be a doctor, has her own ambitions for her life, and of course her own ambitions for what happens. And there's discussion about what is going to happen to that money. And of course, in that family, there is a child, a young boy, and that young boy is the future, is sort of seen as the future. And the question then becomes, where will he go? Finally, there is the wife of Walter, who is, we discover, pregnant, and it has to deal with this pregnancy. And of course, she too has some views and some hopes for her life. So all of these competing interests around this money begin to play a major role. And if we think about the different interests, Walter's idea is that what he's going to do is start a business, and the business is going to be to start a bar to sell liquor. That's what he's going to do, start a bar. And of course, his rationale is quite straightforward. He says that, look, the one thing that happens in the African American community and in all communities in the world is that if you establish a bar, you will never lose money because people are always going to want to drink. People are always going to drink. And it's a very reasonable position. And he holds to that position and says this is what he wants to do: take the money and put that into the bar. The mother, of course, is against that because the mother is a Christian woman who believes that what these bars are doing is destroying the African American community. In fact, the idea is that as a man, he is contributing to alcoholism, to all kinds of delinquencies that surround having a bar or running a bar or African Americans running a bar. So she has other ambitions and thinks that that money he should not be thinking about it in that kind of way. But Walter's argument is quite pragmatic and quite straightforward. because he observes that in their community, the people who own the bars and who own all this liquor business are from outside. They're white people who have come in and are exploiting the internal worlds of African Americans, and he feels that he needs to get in on that money. They're conflicted in that way. Bernitha, the daughter, is interested in going to study medicine, and there is a sense in which the mother has already decided that a certain amount of that money is going to be handed to her so that she can complete her degree and so on. So education as a kind of liberation, as a kind of way towards progress and liberation for the African American is at the center of her circumstance and her situation. And the hope is that the money will be used for that purpose. So that's the crisis. The crisis is already well established. And what Lorraine Hansberry does is that she creates a problem. The problem happens when the mother's goal is what the mother decides that what she wants to do with that money is to buy a house in a white area of town. She wants to move them into a white area of town. And remember, one of the things I told you about Hansberry and Hansberry's background was that she came from a family that had a similar kind of situation where the father, who was a real estate agent and so on and so forth, was thinking of purchasing a house. Now, right away, as the family is thinking about, so we've got this subplot that is running through as to whether, in fact, the mother's decision to take that money to use to buy a house is a prudent decision, and it's a very interesting question. One, is it wise given the antipathy of the white community towards them, and one, it also begs the question: would she be better off spending that money on a nice place in the black side of town, which may be less expensive and it would be more hospitable? But it turns out that one of the things that Lorraine Hansberry was aware of was that it was very possible that she would get more bang for her money purchasing a place or renting a place in the white side of town, because of course their rents were always lower than the pretty dilapidated and quite unfortunate circumstances for African Americans in the south side of town that was isolated for and limited to the African American people. So the mother's goal is that they move into this space, right? And what Walter does is without their permission, he takes the money and he gives the money to his buddy who is going to help them start the liquor business. And of course, as these things go, the buddy absconds with the money. And so the family is left in a crisis, right? And the crisis is a very interesting crisis. And there's this incredible tension about the idea of ambition, the idea of what manhood means, the idea of what it means to be a family, the idea of legacy, the idea of generational tensions between mother and son, and the idea of values about Christian values versus political values versus values for the capitalist system of American life. It is clear, though, that it'll be interesting, and I would like you to explore that, to ask the question: where does Lorraine Hansberry lie and sort of position herself? Where does she land in this debate? Is she a Walter supporter? Or is she a mama, the mother supporter? And it's a very interesting kind of tension because at the end of the play, something happens to Walter. Walter is transformed in that moment. Something quite dramatic happens. And why does he make that transformation? And that transformation takes place in the one scene in which there is a direct confrontation between white supremacy and the white system and the African American family. So we will look at that more carefully in the next segment.